I'm Carenza. I'm an archaeologist and I'm Professor for the Public Understanding Research at the University of Lincoln. I've got a long track record and history in community archaeology and working with wider publics in archaeology, mostly in existing rural communities. So what I wanted to say a few words about for this workshop was the way that place and planning and people are going to need to be and can be integrated in the future as we look at the way settlements will develop. So it's just 10 minutes, so I'm going to look at 4 themes here. Garden villages, settlement infilling, transient mobile populations and connecting communities. So looking at the first of those, garden villages, it's appropriate in the anniversary year of the founding of Milton Keynes in Buckinghamshire in the UK, a major new town that was planned with lots of open spaces and has been critiqued for that, to think about this notion of garden villages and garden planning, because it's very loud, very noisy within current planning ideas in the UK. And in fact, this idea of sort of garden villages is in the government's sort of recommendations for planning. And we can see this idea that new settlements should have space in them is implicit in the notion of garden planning, but often the modern settlements that are being planned don't have very much in the way of open spaces in them. So while it's an easy way to get sort of help your proposal through the planning process to be called a garden village or a garden town or a garden city, I think we need to look critically and thoughtfully at how much open space actually is included when we compare today's proposals with some of the council estates of the 1950s and 60s, which really did have a lot of open space in the same way that Milton Keynes has. Looking at the second one of these themes, settlement infilling, when we look at particularly rural settlements, villages, sometimes small towns, hamlets, there's a lot of pressure for new housing, and the obvious space that seems to be, can seem to be the obvious place to put new housing is in the gaps within existing places. It's not really changing the footprint of the settlement, therefore it seems like it's a non-destructive option. But doing this sort of thing can change the character of the places that are being lived in, and they can also change the way that they can damage existing archaeology. We don't always know what's in these spaces. Often these open spaces within existing settlements are spaces that were previously inhabited, then ceased to be inhabited as a result of perhaps the population decline after the Black Death, and then didn't become repopulated as the settlement population picked up. So infilling is something we need to be aware of. It's very important to communities. Communities often don't like the idea of the open spaces within their villages being built on, but they're often a high priority for planning. The third theme I want to mention is the idea of transient mobile populations. More and more today in our existing communities of all sizes, in fact, but right out into the countryside as well as in the towns and cities, people move around much more than they used to. A couple of generations ago, people might well grow up and spend most of their lives living in the same community. People move around a lot more now for work or for other reasons. And this has a number of implications I think we need to think about when we're thinking about how to connect communities and planning and people in the past for the present and the future. Because one might assume that people who've only recently moved somewhere have no connection with its history, no interest in its history, and sometimes that's the case. But in other instances, people newly moving into a place are very committed to it, interested in it, enthusiastic about it, see it in new ways, and can provide a great opportunity to get engaged in investigating the past of that community. And that brings me on to the fourth theme that I wanted to bring to this workshop, is that idea of connecting communities with the past. And At one level, there's a very practical impact of the need for broadband connections, better broadband connections in places, in that there's lots of digging being done, and this is a destructive process that needs to be monitored. But it's also a creative process in that the opportunity that gives for excavation certainly provides archaeological evidence. But also beyond that, within connecting communities, increasingly in the UK with the Heritage Lottery Fund, community archaeology projects are becoming more and more widespread, and the more people get experience of community archaeology and doing some digging or some archaeological survey or investigation, field walking in their environment, the more enthusiastic they get for it, and then neighbouring communities will hear. And I found this extensively working in Eastern England, the idea to take part in some archaeology spreads because one village hears that another village has got involved in it. And that, of course, provides an opportunity for some of the investigation that needs to take place archaeologically to be carried out, and for much more to be done than is the bare legal minimum or the bare minimum that can possibly be imposed on planners. Individual investigations within areas of village infill can actually be part of much wider projects where people might be doing test pit excavations in their garden, even though they're not going to build there, and that will be able to show them how the settlement developed in the past and provide a context, the bigger picture, for our understanding of the individual place that's been excavated. Future approaches, I think, will be many and varied. Increasingly, we're looking at a landscape scale of inquiry, so looking at the settlements within the wider landscape. Interdisciplinarity, different techniques used, different ideas used, drawn in from different disciplines. Digital humanities, big data, computer processing, for connecting people, for drawing people into projects, for helping people to contribute knowledge, and also, of course, for processing data and for archiving. It is going to be an important enabling tool for the future. And that links into mass participation, citizen research. We really can join up people and places and the past within the planning process to ensure that what we have from the past in our landscape is preserved for the future. And then there's the question of instrumentalised inquiry, this joining up, this involving wider publics in the investigating settlements today can actually confer a wide range of benefits in terms of developing skills, a sense of well-being, a sense of connectedness, relationships within communities. So there's potentially a really big win-win situation from this. The research questions are many and various. I'll put these up on the screen just so they're sitting there. And it's really all about how can we maximise the amount of knowledge we can get, the number of people who share in that knowledge, who help create it and help improve the settlements we live in for the future. There's so much more that we can do than can be done within the narrow planning process if we get a sort of citizen army of people engaging in addressing those issues of the need for settlements to expand in the future. So what we can see from this when we're looking at connecting archaeology, commercial excavation and communities is epitomised here, where in Purton we can see where test pitting carried out by young people developing skills and members of the community who are interested in their history's past has actually highlighted where the Roman settlement is within this community in the top left hand corner, which will help plan for its development in the future should there be a need for it. So a few thoughts for you to think about. Thank you very much for listening.